Captain Penelope Rogers had been running the field hospital for 7 months, and in all that time, not a single person on the forward operating base knew about the other set of wings she wore before medical school. Nobody wondered why she spent her off hours near the flight line, watching the AH-64 Apaches with the kind of intensity that went beyond casual interest. Then came the day when a surprise enemy offensive overran defensive positions, when the base's entire aviation element was either destroyed on the ground or scattered across hostile territory, when armored vehicles started rolling toward the hospital compound where 200 wounded soldiers couldn't be evacuated in time. That's when Penelope walked past the screaming radios and panicked officers, climbed into the one remaining Apache that nobody thought could fly, and reminded an entire enemy armored column why the AH-64 earned its reputation as the tank killer. Before we show you what happened when a medic became death from above, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and hit subscribe. Because what came next turned certain catastrophe into a masterclass in aviation combat that left an enemy commander wondering how one helicopter eliminated his entire assault force. The field hospital smelled like antiseptic, blood, and exhaustion. Captain Penelope Rogers stood at the scrub sink, methodically washing her hands after her third surgery of the morning, watching pink water swirl down the drain. She was 28, average height, black hair pulled back in a tight bun, green eyes that tracked details with precision, fit but not obviously athletic. What stood out was the way she moved, efficient, precise, economical. The field hospital was a collection of prefab buildings and reinforced tents on forward operating base horizon, deep in hostile territory. Penelope had been running the trauma section for 7 months, building a reputation as the doctor who could save people other surgeons would have given up on. Lieutenant Emma Sullivan, the head nurse, appeared in the doorway. 29, competent, kept everything running even in chaos. Captain Rogers, we've got 3 more incoming from that patrol that got hit. ETA 15 minutes, 1 urgent surgical, 2 can wait. Prepper 2, Penelope replied, already moving. I'll be ready. You've been in surgery for 8 hours straight. Maybe let Captain Hayes take this one. Hayes is still working on the blast casualty from this morning. I'm good to go. Sullivan nodded, unsurprised. Captain Rogers never seemed to tire, never seemed to break, just kept working with steady competence. What Sullivan didn't know, what nobody on the base knew except for the commanding officer who'd seen Penelope's complete service record, was that before medical school, Penelope Rogers had been an Apache pilot. Over 800 flight hours, 3 deployments, one of the most naturally gifted aviators her instructors had ever seen. She'd left aviation for medicine after a mission that had gone perfectly, but had left her watching through her targeting system as enemy combatants died under her 30mm cannon. The mission had been necessary, successful, and it had broken something in her that made her realize she wanted to save lives, not take them. So she'd gone to medical school, become a trauma surgeon, and quietly requested that her aviation background be kept out of her official bio. She wanted to be known as a doctor, not as a pilot who'd switched careers. But she still dreamed in the language of aviation, still calculated approach vectors and weapons ranges, still felt her hands itch for a cyclic stick when she heard the distinctive sound of Apache rotors. The medevac arrived 12 minutes later, a Black Hawk that landed in a cloud of dust. Penelope was waiting with her team, moving smoothly into the practiced chaos of receiving casualties. The urgent surgical case was a Ranger with multiple shrapnel wounds and internal bleeding. She had him in OR2 within minutes, her hands working with precision that made complex surgery look routine. 3 hours later, the Ranger was stable. Penelope stripped off her surgical gown, accepted coffee from Sullivan, and stepped outside for air. The flight line was visible from the hospital compound, 6 Apache helicopters and their revetments, being serviced by maintenance crews. Penelope watched them with intense attention. She knew those aircraft, knew the sound of their engines, the feel of their controls. The AH-64D Apache longbow, 30 feet of weaponry designed for one purpose, killing tanks. Hellfire missiles that could reach 8 kilometers, a 30-millimeter chain gun that fired 625 rounds per minute in the right hands, absolutely devastating. Penelope's hands. But that was a different life. Now she saved people. It was better this way. The alarm siren started at 0430 hours the next morning. Penelope was already awake. She was dressed and moving toward the command post before the second siren finished. The command post was organized chaos. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the base commander, stood in front of tactical displays showing a situation deteriorating in real time. 54 years old, combat veteran, calm under pressure. Enemy offensive started 20 minutes ago, she was saying to her staff. Multiple mechanized units moving on our position from 3 directions. Battalion strength armor, T-72 tanks, BMP infantry fighting vehicles, supported by artillery. Someone asked about air support. Someone else mentioned evacuation options. Mitchell's expression said she already knew those answers and didn't like them. Close air support is unavailable. Everything's committed to the main defensive line 50 clicks north, and we can't evacuate because, she gestured to Penelope, we have 200 casualties in the field hospital who can't be moved. The implications settled over the room. They were isolated, under attack by superior forces, with no air support and a hospital full of patients who couldn't evacuate. "What about our Apaches?" asked Major Ryan Carter, one of the infantry company commanders. 31, aggressive, believed every problem had a kinetic solution. Mitchell's expression darkened. Enemy artillery caught our flight line during the initial barrage. We lost 4 birds destroyed, 1 damaged and evacuated with its crew, and 1 that's technically operational but has no crew. The pilots are either dead, wounded, or scattered. "So we have 1 working attack helicopter and nobody to fly it," Carter summarized. "Correct." The Javelin anti-tank missile had a range of only 2.5 kilometers. Against a coordinated armored assault, it wasn't enough. Penelope had been listening quietly, her medical mind calculating casualty projections. If armor reached the base, the death toll would be catastrophic. But another part of her mind, the part that still thought in terms of weapons ranges and target priorities, was doing different calculations. 1 Apache, full weapons load, proper employment against armor. The math was favorable if you had a pilot who knew what they were doing. She spoke before her rational mind could stop her. "Sir, I can fly the Apache." The room went silent. Every eye turned toward her. Mitchell's expression suggested she thought the stress had broken her best trauma surgeon. "Captain Rogers, you're a doctor, not—" "I was an Apache pilot before I went to medical school," Penelope interrupted. 812 combat hours, 3 deployments, qualified on the AH-64D longbow. Mitchell was already shaking her head. "Even if that's true, you're a trauma surgeon. I can't risk losing you." "You're going to lose me anyway when armor shells start landing on the hospital," Penelope replied. "Along with every patient, every nurse, every medic. At least this way I might be able to stop them." Sullivan had followed Penelope and was staring at her. "You're a pilot? An attack helicopter pilot?" "Was," Penelope corrected, "but if the alternative is watching 200 patients die—" Mitchell pulled up something on her tablet, scrolling through Penelope's complete service record. Her expression shifted from skepticism to calculation. "It's true," she said quietly. "Captain Penelope Rogers, formerly of the 1st Battalion, 229th Aviation Regiment, rated senior aviator, multiple commendations." She looked up. "Why did you leave aviation?" "Personal reasons, sir." "But right now you need someone who can employ that Apache, and I'm the only person on this base who can do it." Carter spoke up. "Colonel, I don't mean to question Captain Rogers, but if she's rusty, if she hasn't flown in years—" "5 years," Penelope said, "and I'm not rusty." "Some things you don't forget." Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, weighing an impossible decision. Finally, she turned to her operations officer. "How long until enemy armor is in range of the base?" 45 minutes, sir. Maybe an hour if they're cautious." "And the Apache?" "It's already fueled and armed, sir." 15 minutes. Mitchell looked at Penelope. "Captain Rogers, if I authorize this, you understand you'll be going up alone. No wingman, no support against an armored column with air defense assets designed to kill helicopters. Yes, sir, I understand. And you're confident you can employ the aircraft effectively? Penelope thought about all the missions she'd flown, all the tanks she'd killed. Then she thought about the patients in her hospital who would die if she didn't do this. Yes, sir. I'm confident. Mitchell made her decision. Do it. Get that Apache airborne. Captain Rogers, you're authorized to engage all enemy armor threatening this base. Try not to die. We're going to need a trauma surgeon after this is over. Penelope was already moving toward the door. I'll do my best, sir. Sullivan caught up with her halfway to the flight line. Penelope, this is insane. You're a doctor. I was a pilot first, Penelope replied, breaking into a jog. Right now, the base needs the pilot more than the doctor. What if you get shot down? Then you'll have to handle the trauma surgery yourself. They reached the flight line where the last operational Apache sat. The maintenance crew chief was Chief Warrant Officer Derek Walsh, 36, 15 years in aviation maintenance. Chief, this is Captain Rogers, Sullivan said. She's going to fly this bird. Walsh looked at Penelope with skepticism. Ma'am, with respect, this isn't a simulator. I know what I'm doing, Penelope interrupted, already moving toward the aircraft. She started her walk-around inspection, checking control surfaces, weapon systems, sensor mounts. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. Walsh watched for about 30 seconds before his expression shifted. You actually are a pilot. I actually am, Penelope confirmed. How's the bird? Any maintenance issues? She's green across the board. Full fuel, full weapons load, 16 Hellfires, 76 rockets, 1,200 rounds of 30 Mike. Good. Clear the area. I'm starting engines. Walsh backed away, and Sullivan grabbed Penelope's arm. Please don't die. We need you. That's why I'm doing this, Penelope replied. She climbed into the front seat, the gunner's position, which could be flown from using override controls. Her hands moved through the startup sequence that came back like breathing. The APU spooled up first. Then she started Engine 1, watching gauges climb into green. Engine 2 followed, the rotor system engaged, blades beginning their rotation. Systems came online. Targeting systems, weapon systems, defensive countermeasures. The helmet-mounted display lowered, giving her thermal imaging, weapon status, and tactical data. She ran weapons checks. Hellfires showed 16 ready, rockets 76 ready. The 30mm chain gun showed 1,200 rounds. Everything was green. She keyed the radio. Base operations, this is Apache 1-1, requesting immediate departure clearance. Mitchell's voice came back. Apache 1-1, you are cleared for immediate departure. You have weapons free on all hostile armor. Godspeed, Captain. Copy. Apache 1-1 is rolling. Penelope brought the throttles up, feeling the Apache lift off. She transitioned forward, building speed, gaining altitude. The base fell away beneath her, and for the first time in 5 years, she was back in her element. The battlefield revealed itself through her sensors. The enemy column was exactly where intelligence had predicted. 12 armored vehicles in proper formation. 8 T-72 main battle tanks, 4 BMP, 2 infantry fighting vehicles, moving with mutual support. They were about 30 minutes away from artillery range of her hospital. Penelope climbed to 4,000 feet, using altitude to extend her sensor range. The longbow radar was already painting targets, the fire control system prioritizing them. She could see the lead tanks moving with confidence, probably assuming the American base had no air defense capability. They were about to learn why that assumption was fatal. She selected her first Hellfire missile, locking onto the lead T-72. The seeker had acquired the target, solid tone. Range, 7.2 kilometers. Target lock, rifle 1. The Hellfire dropped from the wing pylon, rocket motor igniting. Penelope was already selecting her second target. Lock, fire. Rifle 2. She fired 4 missiles in rapid succession, each tracking toward a different tank. The first one hit before the enemy knew they were under attack. The T-72 erupted in a massive explosion. 40 tons of Soviet armor transformed into a fireball. The second and third missiles hit nearly simultaneously. 2 more tanks destroyed. The fourth missile struck a BMP. The enemy column scattered, tanks breaking formation and searching for cover that didn't exist. Return fire started, machine guns and main guns firing at where they thought she was. They weren't even close. Penelope banked hard right, gaining distance while her sensors reacquired targets. She fired 2 more Hellfires at tanks that had stopped. Both hit, both kills. 6 vehicles down, 6 remaining. But now they were reacting. She saw a BMP's turret rotating, an SA-7MANPADS launcher emerging. Someone was going to try to shoot her down. She didn't give them the chance. Her thumb found the rocket pod selector, designating 19 rockets. The targeting system calculated the ballistic path. She fired. The rockets rippled off in less than 2 seconds, arcing downward in a pattern that bracketed 3 vehicles. The explosions were devastating, enough to destroy the BMP and suppress anyone trying to use air defense. 10 vehicles down, 2 remaining. The surviving tanks were running, making for a tree line. Penelope pursued with Predator patience. She lined up for a gun run, dropping to 1,500 feet and accelerating to 140 knots. The 30mm chain gun was slaved to her helmet-mounted sight. Wherever she looked, the gun pointed. She looked at the first fleeing tank and squeezed the trigger. The gun spoke with a stuttering roar, depleted uranium rounds downrange at 2,700 feet per second, each round designed to penetrate armor. The first tank's engine compartment exploded. The vehicle lurched to a stop, smoke pouring from every opening. Penelope transitioned to the last tank, walking her fire across it with precision. The tank tried to turn, but it was too slow. Her rounds found the turret ring, then the ammunition storage. The tank came apart from the inside. 12 vehicles, 12 kills, 11 minutes from first missile to last gun run. She pulled up, climbing back to altitude while scanning for additional threats. The battlefield was quiet except for burning vehicles and scattered infantry fleeing on foot. Penelope keyed her radio, her voice calm. Base operations, Apache 1-1. Enemy armor is neutralized. 12 vehicles destroyed, no survivors threatening the base. I'm RTB, Mitchell's voice came back, carrying relief and awe. Apache 1-1, that's incredible work. Return to base, Captain. The return flight took 12 minutes. Penelope ran through post-combat checks. Everything showed green. She'd gone into combat, eliminated an entire armored column, and come back without a scratch. She landed smoothly. Engines spooled down, systems shut down, and then she was climbing out into a crowd of people staring at her like she'd performed a miracle. Mitchell approached. Captain Rogers, I just watched the drone footage. That was some of the most precise combat flying I've ever seen. Thank you, sir. Just doing what was necessary. You destroyed 12 armored vehicles in 11 minutes, alone, without taking a single hit. She shook her head. Why the hell did you leave aviation? Penelope was quiet, watching smoke rise from the distant battlefield. Because I'm better at saving lives than taking them, sir. Today was an exception. An exception that saved 200 patients and everyone on this base. Yes, sir, but that doesn't change what I am. I'm a doctor. This, she gestured to the Apache, this was just something I used to be. Sullivan approached. The trauma surgery patient from this morning is asking for you. He heard what you did. Everyone's heard. Penelope nodded, already transitioning back into doctor mode. I'll be there in 5 minutes. As she walked toward the hospital compound, she could feel people watching, whispering. The quiet doctor who'd turned out to be a combat aviator. The medic who'd climbed into an Apache and eliminated an entire enemy assault force. She didn't want the attention. She'd left aviation to get away from being the person who killed people efficiently. But she couldn't deny the mathematics. 12 enemy vehicles destroyed versus 200 patients saved. Sometimes the calculus of war required you to be the person you'd stopped being. The debriefing took place 3 hours later, after Penelope had checked on her patients and performed 2 minor surgical procedures. She showed up still wearing her medical scrubs. Mitchell had assembled her key staff, along with intelligence officers who'd arrived to understand how one pilot had eliminated an enemy battalion's worth of armor. Let's start with the tactical assessment, Mitchell said. Captain Rogers, walk us through your engagement. Penelope pulled up the tactical display, marking positions with precision. Initial engagement at 0447 hours from 7 kilometers range using Hellfire missiles against the lead elements. I prioritized tanks over BMPs since they represented the greater threat. 4 missiles, 4 kills in the first 30 seconds, she continued, describing each phase with clinical detachment, target selection, weapons employment, maneuvering to avoid return fire. The final phase was gun employment against the 2 retreating tanks, she concluded. Total engagement time 11 minutes, 12 vehicles destroyed, estimated enemy casualties between 48 and 60 personnel. One of the intelligence officers leaned forward. "Captain, were you taking fire during the engagement?" "Yes, sir. Multiple tanks engaged with main gunfire, and I observed at least 2 attempts to employ man-pads. I used altitude, speed, and countermeasures to avoid being hit." "You made it sound routine." "It was routine, sir. That's what we train for." Carter spoke up. "Captain, you were a pilot 5 years ago. Most people get rusty. How did you maintain proficiency?" Penelope was quiet. "I didn't maintain proficiency in the technical sense. I didn't fly, but I never stopped thinking like a pilot. It stayed with me even when I didn't want it to." "Why didn't you want it to?" Mitchell asked quietly. "Because killing people, even when it's necessary, isn't something I wanted to be good at, sir. I became a doctor because I wanted to save lives, not take them." "But you're good at both." "Yes, sir. But only one of them lets me sleep at night." The room was quiet. Then Mitchell cleared her throat. "Captain Rogers, I'm recommending you for commendation. You saved this entire base." "Thank you, sir. But I'd prefer if we kept the details quiet. I just want to go back to my hospital." "Understood. But Rogers," Mitchell waited until she looked at her. "If we ever face a situation like this again, you know where to find me, sir, but I really hope it doesn't come to that." Over the following weeks, the story spread despite Penelope's preference for anonymity. The medic who turned out to be an attack pilot, the doctor who eliminated 12 armored vehicles in 11 minutes. Some pilots wanted to talk tactics. Some doctors wanted to understand how someone could be both healer and killer. Penelope deflected most of it, staying focused on her hospital work. But sometimes, late at night, she'd stand at the edge of the flight line and watch the Apaches. And she'd remember what it felt like to be that person. Sullivan found her there one evening. "Thinking about flying again?" "Thinking about why I stopped," Penelope replied. "Every time I made a perfect shot, I was taking someone's life. It got too easy, too mechanical. I needed to do something that reminded me that people were worth saving." "But you saved 200 people that day, by eliminating 12 vehicles." "I know, and I'd do it again if I had to. But that doesn't change what I am now. I'm a doctor, someone who fixes people instead of destroying them." Sullivan nodded. "For what it's worth, you're the best trauma surgeon I've ever worked with. Whatever you were before, you're using it to save lives now. That's what matters." "I hope so," Penelope said quietly. The weeks turned into months and Penelope settled back into her routine. Surgery, patient rounds, training new medical personnel who rotated through the base. The hospital became busier as operations tempo increased across the theater, which meant more casualties, more complex injuries, more opportunities for her to employ her surgical skills. One afternoon, a young private arrived with a chest wound that would have killed him if the medics hadn't gotten him to the hospital in time. Penelope spent 4 hours in surgery, repairing damage that seemed impossible to fix. When she finally emerged from the OR, exhausted but satisfied, Sullivan was waiting with an update. "He's going to make it," Sullivan said. "The medic said if you'd been 5 minutes slower, he wouldn't have had a chance." Penelope nodded, stripping off her surgical gloves. "That's why we're here. To give people chances they wouldn't have otherwise." "Speaking of which," Sullivan continued, "Colonel Mitchell wants to see you." Something about a video conference with higher headquarters. Penelope felt her stomach tighten. Video conferences with higher headquarters usually meant someone wanted to talk about the Apache engagement, wanted to turn her into some kind of poster child for versatility or dual capability. She'd spent weeks avoiding that kind of attention, but orders were orders. She changed into a clean uniform and made her way to Mitchell's office. The colonel was waiting with a laptop already set up for the video call. "Captain Rogers, thank you for coming. This shouldn't take long." The screen came to life, showing a two-star General Penelope didn't recognize. Major General Patricia Bradford, according to the nameplate visible in the video feed. 58, sharp eyes, the kind of officer who'd built a career on making smart decisions. "Captain Rogers," Bradford began without preamble, "I've been reviewing your file. Both versions, the one everyone sees and the one that tells the complete story." "Yes, ma'am," Penelope replied, keeping her expression neutral. "I'm not here to offer you a medal or tell you that you should come back to aviation full-time," Bradford continued. "I'm here because I wanted to understand why you made the choices you made. Why leave aviation when you were that good at it?" Penelope considered her answer carefully. "Ma'am, I was good at it because I'd learned to separate the act from the consequences. When you're behind the weapon systems of an Apache, targets become problems to solve rather than people to kill. That efficiency made me effective. It also made me realize I was losing something important, the recognition that every trigger pull ended someone's existence." "So, you chose medicine?" "Yes, ma'am. I chose to save lives instead of taking them. To be the person who gave people second chances instead of ending their stories." Bradford nodded slowly. "And yet when the situation required it, you accessed those old skills and used them to save 200 people. Doesn't that justify the capabilities you developed?" "It justifies using them that one time, ma'am. It doesn't change my assessment that I'm better employed as a surgeon than as a pilot, even though you're clearly exceptional at both." "Especially because I'm exceptional at both, ma'am. Someone else can learn to be a good pilot, but the combination of surgical skill and combat experience I have, that's rarer and more valuable in an OR than in a cockpit." Bradford smiled slightly. "That's exactly the answer I was hoping to hear. Captain Rogers, I'm not ordering you back to aviation, but I'm going to make sure your complete record is available to any commander who might need someone with your unique combination of skills. Sometimes the best weapons are the ones we keep in reserve." "I understand, ma'am." "Good. And Captain, what you did that day saved more than just 200 patients. You saved a strategic position that would have been catastrophic to lose. Sometimes one person in the right place with the right skills changes everything. Thank you for being that person." The call ended, and Mitchell looked at Penelope with an expression that might have been approval or relief or both. "She's right, you know. What you did mattered." "I know, sir, but it doesn't change what I want to do with my career." "I'm not trying to change that. I just want you to understand that having multiple capabilities doesn't diminish either one. You're a brilliant surgeon and you were an exceptional pilot. Those things can coexist." Penelope was quiet for a moment. "They can coexist, sir, but only one of them is who I choose to be." 3 months later, Penelope received orders rotating her back to the United States. The field hospital threw her a going-away party, and she accepted thanks from people who still had trouble reconciling the skilled surgeon with the combat pilot. On her last day, she walked to the flight line. The Apaches were still there. Walsh saw her and walked over. "Captain Rogers, heard you're heading stateside." "That's right, Chief." "That bird you flew," he gestured to the Apache that now bore small kill markings. "The pilot said it flies like a dream. You brought it back in perfect condition." "That's because I used to be good at this," Penelope said. "Back when being good at it was my primary job." "You ever miss it?" "Flying?" Penelope thought carefully. "Sometimes. But I don't miss what it made me. I'm better as a doctor. You saved everyone on this base that day." "I know, and if I had to do it again, I would. But I really hope I don't have to." Walsh nodded. "Well, if you ever decide to come back to aviation, I'd be honored to be your crew chief." "I appreciate that, Chief. But I think my flying days are over." She walked back to the hospital compound, where her medical gear was packed. Sullivan was waiting with the last paperwork. "So this is it," Sullivan said. "The legend heads back to civilization." "I'm not a legend," Penelope protested. "I'm just someone who did what was necessary." "That's exactly what makes you a legend. Most people with your skills would want recognition. You just wanted to go back to saving lives." They said their goodbyes, and Penelope climbed into the transport helicopter. As they lifted off, she looked down at the base one last time, at the hospital where she'd saved hundreds, at the flight line where she'd borrowed her old skills for one engagement, at the battlefield where 12 vehicles still sat as reminders. Then they banked away, and the base disappeared, and Penelope Rogers went back to being what she'd chosen, a doctor, a healer, someone who saved lives instead of taking them. But in the back of her mind, filed away like surgical knowledge she hoped never to need but would always remember, the skills remained. The ability to employ an attack helicopter with lethal precision, the capacity to read a battlefield and solve tactical problems with weapons fire. She hoped she'd never need those skills again. But if she did, they'd be ready. The story of Captain Penelope Rogers spread through military aviation communities. The doctor who'd turned out to be an elite attack pilot, the medic who'd climbed into an Apache and eliminated an entire armored assault force. Most versions missed the point. They focused on the dramatic revelation, the unlikely hero. But the people who'd been there understood the real story. It wasn't about a doctor who turned out to be a pilot. It was about someone who'd been good at killing people, had recognized this wasn't who she wanted to be, and had deliberately chosen a different path. Someone who'd spent 5 years saving lives instead of taking them. The fact that she could still access those old skills when necessary didn't define her. What defined her was the choice to use them only as a last resort. Captain Rogers continued her career in trauma surgery, eventually becoming one of the most respected surgeons in military medicine. She never flew an Apache again after that day. Never needed to. The skills remained, filed away like emergency procedures you hope never to employ. But everyone on Forward Operating Base Horizon carried the knowledge that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. Sometimes the person you think you understand has depths you'd never suspect. And sometimes the difference between catastrophe and survival is one person willing to be what the situation requires, even if it means temporarily becoming someone they'd stopped being years ago. The wounded who'd been in Penelope's hospital would tell you she was the best trauma surgeon they'd ever met. The pilots would tell you she was one of the most naturally gifted aviators they'd heard of. The base commander would tell you she was the person who saved 200 lives in 11 minutes. All of them would be right. Because Penelope Rogers contained multitudes, skills and capabilities she'd chosen not to define herself by, but which remained available when circumstances demanded them. Years later, when military medical schools taught courses on trauma surgery under combat conditions, they would sometimes reference the case of a surgeon who'd saved hundreds of lives through skillful medical intervention. They rarely mentioned that the same surgeon had also saved hundreds of lives in 11 minutes of perfect aviation combat. That was exactly how Penelope wanted it. She'd built a new identity around healing, around giving people second chances, around being the person who fixed what was broken rather than the person who broke things efficiently. The Apache engagement had been necessary. It had been successful. It had saved lives that would otherwise have been lost. But it remained an exception in a career devoted to a different purpose. Never assume you know what someone is capable of. The medic might be a pilot. The doctor might be a warrior. The quiet professional saving lives might be the deadliest person on the battlefield when the situation requires it. And sometimes, the most important skill isn't knowing how to do something. It's knowing when not to do it, choosing the path that saves lives instead of taking them, and only accessing those dangerous capabilities when there's no other choice. Captain Penelope Rogers made that choice every day, and on one day, when 200 people would have died without her, she made the other choice, the hard one, the necessary one. Then she went back to being a doctor, because that's who she'd chosen to be, but the skills remained, just in case. The final truth about Captain Penelope Rogers was this: she was proof that people could change who they were, could choose different paths, could leave behind identities that no longer fit who they wanted to be. But she was also proof that the person you used to be never completely disappears. It just waits quietly in reserve, available if needed, but not demanding to be used. That balance between who you were and who you chose to become was perhaps her greatest achievement. Not the lives saved in surgery or the tanks destroyed from an Apache, but the wisdom to know when to be which person and the strength to choose healing over destruction whenever possible. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales of courage.